She laughed, loud and sharp like a slap across my face. "This is it," she sneered, stepping into my tiny rental room, her designer heels clicking against the cheap linoleum. "You'll never own anything, will you?" Rachel's voice curled with disdain as her eyes scanned the cracked plaster walls, the worn-out armchair, the small kitchenette tucked into the corner. I stood frozen, holding the chipped mug I'd made tea in, watching her wrinkle her nose at my curtains like they offended her. I felt something in me crumble. I had spent my entire life building, and now I had nothing to show for it. Not even the respect of the woman who married my only son. Let me know where you're listening from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. And if this story speaks to you, share your thoughts below. Don't skip, because what happens at the end will surprise you more than the betrayal itself. She swept her hair over one shoulder and turned to my son David. "My boy, my heart beat. I told you we didn't need to visit," she said. "It's just depressing." He didn't say a word, just looked down at his phone and muttered something about traffic. Then they left. Just like that. Gone. And when the door clicked shut, I collapsed onto the edge of my bed and cried like I hadn't cried since the day his father died. I cried because I remembered a time when David used to call me Mama with so much affection. When he'd sit next to me on this very bed before it was mine alone, holding up his drawings and telling me he was going to buy me a house one day. I remembered the little boy with messy curls and scraped knees who used to cling to my side after school. The boy who never went to sleep unless I tucked him in even when he was 10 years old. What happened to that boy? I wiped my face and reached for the old photo on the nightstand. My husband Jack smiled back at me from the faded frame. God, how he would have hated seeing me like this, in this room. Disrespected, looked down on, treated like nothing. But I stayed quiet, even after all these years. I never remarried after Jack. Never even thought about it. My life became David. Everything I did, every penny I saved, every holiday I skipped, it was all for him. I worked nights as a cashier when he was little. Picked up weekend cleaning gigs at the hotel down by the airport. Sold the diamond from Jack's wedding ring when David needed tuition money. I never asked for anything back. I never wanted much. Just to be included, respected, maybe loved. When David married Rachel, I was hopeful. She was charming. She hugged me the first time we met and called me Mom so sweetly I almost cried. For the first year, things were warm. She invited me over, baked with me, let me hold her hand at the baby shower. But something shifted. Slowly, quietly. At first, it was subtle. Little things. She corrected how I spoke in front of others. Rolled her eyes when I brought homemade soup over. Told me we don't really do casseroles in this house. But I brushed it off. I wanted to believe it was just stress. Then came the dinners, where I was the only one not offered wine. The family vacations I wasn't told about. The birthday parties where my name wasn't even on the invitation. And David, he just disappeared into her. I remember one afternoon when I called to ask if I could visit. Rachel answered. "You know it's just not a good time, Judy. We've been so busy. Maybe next month?" It was May. I didn't see them again until August. So I stayed here in this little room I moved into after selling our family home, the home Jack and I built with our bare hands. I told everyone it was to downsize to travel more. But truthfully, I sold it to give David a down payment on his house. He never asked. I just offered. He cried when I handed him the check. He said he'd never forget what I did. I guess he forgot. Rachel's words that day. "You'll never own anything," stuck like a thorn in my chest. She didn't know what I had given up, what I had quietly held on to, and maybe she didn't care. But as I sat there wiping my tears, I realized something. I couldn't change who she was. or what David had become. But I still had something they didn't know about. And that's when it began. The slow, quiet shift. The part they never saw coming. I still remember the smell of Jack's shirts after he passed, that faint scent of cedar and engine oil. He was a mechanic, an honest, simple man who believed in fixing things with his hands, whether it was a car engine or a broken cabinet door. When he died suddenly of a heart attack, I was 36. David was only 13, too young to understand what gone really meant, but old enough to see the way my hands shook at the funeral. He squeezed my hand the whole time, wouldn't let go. And that's how we survived together. There was no inheritance, no savings. Just a toolbox, a life insurance policy worth barely enough to cover the funeral, and a house that still had a small mortgage. I went back to work a week later. I had to. David needed clothes, school supplies, lunch money. I took a job cleaning offices at night and worked as a cashier during the day. I slept in naps, ate standing up, and prayed I wouldn't get sick because I couldn't afford to miss a shift. But through it all, I never once let David feel the weight. I packed his lunches with handwritten notes. I cheered at every science fair, every soccer game, every talent show. I was there, always. He used to say, "You're the strongest person I know, Mama." We didn't go on vacations, couldn't afford them. But every summer, I'd set up a tent in the backyard and we'd camp. He thought it was magical. I made hot dogs over a tiny grill, and we'd lie on our backs looking at the stars, talking about his dreams. He wanted to be an architect back then. He liked building things just like his dad. I remember the day he got his scholarship letter. Full ride to a top university. I cried so hard, I had to sit down. I think I scared him at first. But they were happy tears. Pure joy. He didn't want to go. Said he couldn't leave me alone. That's the kind of boy he was. But I made him go. I told him, "I'll be fine, baby. This is your chance. Make a life for yourself. One day, you'll look back and see this was the moment everything changed." He believed me, and for a while things stayed good. He called every weekend, came home for the holidays, brought laundry, asked for cooking tips, told me about the girl he met in his architecture class, Rachel. He said she was smart, confident, different from the others, Ma. You'll see. I smiled and said I couldn't wait to meet her. And I meant it. The first time she came over for dinner, she brought a bottle of wine and complimented my roast chicken. She helped with the dishes, laughed at David's childhood stories. I thought, thank God he's found someone who gets him. They were engaged 6 months later. I offered to help with the wedding. Told them I could bake the cake. Rachel smiled politely, said they were going with a professional. I offered to sew the napkins. I used to do a bit of sewing on the side. Again, she declined. Still, I didn't take it personally. Weddings were stressful. She probably just wanted things to be perfect. I gave them a check the week before the wedding. It was everything I had, every cent from the sale of Jack's tools, the house, and the tiny savings I'd scraped together over the years. $50,000. David cried, hugged me, said, "I'll pay you back, Mom. I swear." I told him it wasn't a loan. "It's my wedding gift to you. Build your life. Be happy." He promised he'd never forget. I moved into a small rental room in the city after that. A friend of mine, Linda, had a garage apartment she offered at a low rate. It was small, sure, but it was quiet. And mine. I planted flowers in pots on the windowsill, bought a little radio for the kitchen. I tried to make it home. At first they visited, came over with photos of the honeymoon, talked about starting a family. But after a year, the calls came less frequently. David got busy with work. Rachel didn't have time. Holidays were now rotating between families. I understood. People grow. Lives shift. But it was the little moments that stung. The way Rachel referred to me as Judy instead of Mom. The way David would glance at her before answering my questions. The way they acted like I was someone they had to tolerate, not someone they were grateful for. Still, I stayed kind. I brought over soup when they were sick, watched their dog when they traveled, gave Rachel birthday gifts she never used. She once left a scarf I hand-knit still in the gift bag. 6 months later, I found it in their guest room closet untouched. The final blow came 3 weeks before everything changed. Rachel invited me over for brunch, her idea surprisingly. When I arrived, the door was already open. I stepped inside and heard her voice echoing from the kitchen. "She lives in that dump. You'd think after all this time she'd have something to show for it. I mean, what kind of person gets to 60 and still rents a room?" David's voice was lower. "She helped me with college Rach. The house. I owe her. She's a burden, David, and we're not a charity." I stood, frozen groceries still in my arms. My heart cracked. Not all at once. Slowly. Cleanly. Rachel came around the corner, eyes wide when she saw me. "Oh, I didn't hear you come in." I said nothing. Just set the groceries on the counter and left. I didn't speak to them again until the day she mocked my rental. But that day, something in me turned. I started remembering the things I'd quietly set aside. Things even they didn't know. Because I might not have had a house, but I wasn't as poor as they believed. Not even close. I'll never forget the first time Rachel told me I wasn't welcome to stay the night in their new home. It was shortly after they moved into that big white colonial 2-story out in the suburbs with the wraparound porch and the manicured hedges. The kind of place that has a laundry chute, double ovens, and a staircase just for show. They were proud of it, I could tell. And I was proud for them, truly. I helped make that possible. They had invited me over for dinner, and I brought my little overnight bag, assuming I'd spend the night like I used to back when David was in college. Rachel opened the door and gave me a half hug, then stepped back and glanced down at the bag. "Oh, you brought clothes?" She asked, her mouth twitching into a smile that wasn't really a smile. I nodded. "Thought I'd stay the night if that's okay." She hesitated. Just for a breath. Then she said, "Oh, I didn't realize. It's just we've got contractors coming early. Water heater repair. It'll be noisy. You probably wouldn't sleep well." She turned, walked into the kitchen. David didn't say a word. That was the moment it hit me. I wasn't family anymore. I was a guest. And not even a convenient one. From then on, things changed. Invitations dwindled. When I did get invited, it was always with conditions, short visits, always during the day, always with some reason why I shouldn't linger. "We've got errands. We're meeting friends. We need to clean the carpets." One time Rachel joked about sending me a calendar invite next time I wanted to come by. She laughed. I didn't. I noticed the look she gave me when I wore my older shoes. The way she gently pushed my hand off her granite countertop if it was still damp from washing. She once moved a chair I'd just sat in and sprayed it with a lavender disinfectant. I began to feel like a ghost in their lives. Something inconvenient and outdated. One weekend, David called and asked if I'd thought about moving into assisted living. Said Rachel had found a lovely community with game nights and other people your age. He said it like it was a favor. Like they'd done the research for me. I didn't say much that day. Just listened. I visited the place once out of curiosity. It was clean. Too clean. Silent. The kind of place where people sit by windows waiting for phone calls that never come. I thanked them for thinking of me, and said no. After that, Rachel stopped pretending. She would walk past me like I was part of the furniture. Introduce me to her friends as David's mom, not Judy, not Mama. Just a title. The worst part, David let it happen. Sometimes I saw glimpses of the boy I raised when he'd fix me a plate without being asked, or when he kissed my cheek out of habit. But those moments got rarer. He was quieter now, more distant. Like there was a wall between us neither of us knew how to tear down. So I retreated. I stopped visiting. I waited for their calls. When they didn't come, I told myself they were busy. When they forgot birthdays, I reminded myself they were overwhelmed. I made excuses for them. For him. But every time I sat in that tiny rental room, staring at the cracked walls, and the sound of the upstairs neighbor stomping around, I felt smaller and smaller. I wasn't angry yet. I was just tired. Then came the day they hosted that neighborhood brunch. Rachel invited everyone. I wasn't on the list. A neighbor of mine, her name was Simone, lovely woman, told me she saw the invitation on Rachel's Facebook page. I hadn't been invited. Again. So I baked an apple tart dressed in my best blouse and walked over anyway. Rachel opened the door and blinked like she'd seen a ghost. "Oh. Hi. We didn't expect you." I smiled. "Figured I'd stop by. I heard the neighborhood's all here." She didn't refuse me. Not in front of all those people. But she didn't welcome me either. Just gave me a tight smile and stepped aside. I mingled. I smiled. I listened. And I heard her. Laughing to two women by the mimosa bar. She still rents. Can you believe that 63 years old and nothing to her name? She gave David money once, and now she thinks we owe her the rest of her life. The women gasped softly. One of them said, "But she seems so sweet." Rachel rolled her eyes. "Sweet doesn't buy a house." I left early. Tart untouched. I went home and stared at my walls again. And I thought, maybe they don't know. Maybe they don't realize who they're mocking. Because the truth was, this room I called a rental. It wasn't what it seemed. And I wasn't the helpless old woman they thought I was. I didn't say a word to anyone after that brunch. Not to David, not to Rachel, not even to Simone, though she gently asked how I was doing the next time she saw me bringing in groceries. I just smiled and said, "Fine, dear. Just a bit tired," and I was tired. Not in the way that sleep could fix. I was tired in my bones. Tired of being dismissed, of being overlooked, of being treated like a piece of their past they wanted to forget. But I also felt something else. Something stirring deep down. Not quite anger, not quite revenge. More like focus. I stopped visiting. I stopped waiting. I became silent. And in my silence, I listened. I watched. I paid attention. I learned. Rachel and David weren't doing as well as they pretended. I could tell. Rachel's social media used to be filled with travel photos, wine tastings, charity events. Lately, the pictures were throwbacks or tightly framed selfies that didn't show their house. David started coming to see me again alone, usually. He always had an excuse. Had a client meeting nearby. Thought I'd drop in. But I knew. He needed space. He needed someone to talk to who didn't expect anything back. He never said it outright, but he was struggling. His firm had downsized. Projects were delayed. And Rachel's boutique, it had closed 6 months ago. Quietly. No big announcement. Just gone. One afternoon I made him tea in my little kitchen. He sipped it slowly, eyes tired, hair a bit grayer than I remembered. "Things okay at home?" I asked softly. He hesitated. She's stressed. There's just a lot going on." I nodded. Didn't push. He sighed. "Sometimes I wonder if we got too much house. It's like the walls are closing in." I stirred a bit of honey into my own cup and said, "The walls only close in when the people inside stop talking." He looked at me then like he wanted to say something. But instead, he just stared into his mug. When he left that day, he hugged me. Really hugged me. Not the quick, distracted kind. A full one. And when he pulled back, he said, "You've always been there. I don't say it enough, but thank you." After he left, I opened the box I kept in the bottom drawer of my dresser. It was old, covered in dust. Inside were faded documents, envelopes, hand-scribbled notes, most of them about a property. A piece of land I'd inherited from my Aunt Lorraine, my mother's sister. She had no children, and when she passed, she left it to me. Back then, it was just a wooded lot outside the city, nothing special. I didn't sell it. I didn't need to. I kept paying the taxes year after year. Quietly. 2 years ago, the city began expanding that way. Developers came sniffing around. I said no to the first offer, and the second? Eventually, someone offered a sum I couldn't ignore, but I still didn't sell. Instead, I used the land as collateral. Bought 2 rental homes under a trust name, renovated them with the help of a small company run by a kind couple I'd met at the community center. One of the homes. It was right behind Rachel and David's house, the one she called an eyesore. She never knew I owned it. I kept everything in someone else's name. Paid through accounts Rachel and David would never trace. I kept it clean, legal simple. I wasn't doing it to trick anyone. I just wanted a backup plan. A place that was mine. And now, as I watched their world slowly crack, I began to see. The silence had been my armor. They thought I had nothing because I never bragged, never showed off. Rachel judged me by my shoes, my curtains, my chipped tea mug. But she never looked at the way I paid in cash. The way I never asked for help. The way I carried myself with quiet dignity. She didn't know I was waiting. One evening, I heard raised voices through the fence. Their back deck faced the small lot of my rental home. I sat on the porch, pretending to water the potted plants and listened. "You're spending money like we're still making 6 figures," David shouted. "And you're acting like your mother's going to bail us out," Rachel snapped. Newsflash, she lives in a shoebox. My hands shook just a little. Not from pain, but from clarity. They truly believed I had nothing. Less than nothing. They thought they were safe, that I was weak, and that more than anything would be their undoing. I started making calls, quiet ones. I met with my lawyer, an old friend of Jack's, still working part-time out of his home office. I told him everything, laid it all out. The properties, the trusts, the accounts. "I want to restructure," I said. "Prepare things, in case I decide to make some changes." He raised an eyebrow. "Planning to finally show your cards?" "Maybe," I said. Or maybe I'm just making sure I'm not written out of my own story. I signed a few documents, updated my will, drafted a letter to be read only under very specific conditions. It wasn't revenge, not yet, but I was ready now. For the first time in years, I was fully, quietly ready. They never asked me what I did with the money from my old house. Not once. Not when I handed David that check for $50,000. Not when I moved into the rental. Not when I stopped buying Christmas gifts that first year and instead gave handmade scarves and framed photographs. They just assumed it was all gone, that I'd drained myself for their future and had nothing left. Maybe they thought I was too simple to invest, too naive to protect what little I had. Rachel once laughed about boomers with coffee cans full of cash, and David said nothing. But I didn't have coffee cans. I had contracts and land. What Rachel never knew, what even David never realized, was that my Aunt Lorraine hadn't just left me a wooded lot outside the city. She left me oil rights. Back then, the land was worthless. Just pine trees, clay soil, and mosquito clouds. But 20 years changes everything. I ignored the lowball offers. I sat on it, waited, like my aunt had done. Then 3 years ago, I leased the mineral rights, quietly, kept the checks going into an LLC in a name Rachel had never heard. I lived on barely more than my Social Security. But that LLC, it grew. By the time Rachel laughed at my tiny rental room and said I'd never own anything I owned, 3 properties outright and held shares in a quiet little fund that paid me monthly dividends. She didn't know because I never told them. Not out of malice, just because they never asked. They only saw the worn shoes, the frugal meals, the tiny second-hand bookshelf where I kept all my memories. That day she mocked me in my own space. I felt something lock into place. Not bitterness, not even anger, just certainty. They were going to learn. I started by visiting the house behind theirs. The one Rachel hated. She called it an eyesore once during a wine night with her friends. They didn't know I heard, but I did. That house had belonged to a retired teacher who'd passed away quietly, no children. I bought it through the trust just after it went on the market. It was a fixer-upper then. Now, it was clean, bright, beautifully modest. I walked through the rooms slowly. The air smelled like new paint and lemon wood polish. I ran my hand along the windowsill that overlooked Rachel and David's backyard. Their deck was visible through the trees. I didn't smile. Not yet. But inside, something hummed. I asked the property manager to install blackout curtains. I wanted them to see nothing, not until I let them. Back home in my rental, I opened a worn notebook and began making a list. Not a petty list, not a revenge plan. Just the truth. Things I'd done. Money I'd given. Moments I'd been erased from. I wasn't keeping score. I was remembering. And as I wrote, I realized how much I'd lost without realizing. Rachel hadn't just taken my son's time. She'd taken his words, his heart. And in his place stood a man I didn't recognize anymore. A man too tired or too indifferent to defend me. But I wasn't done yet. I met with my lawyer again. Told him I wanted to reassign the trusts. Change the beneficiaries. He didn't blink. Just slid the paperwork across the table. "It's your empire," he said. "You decide who inherits it." I smiled at that. Empire's a big word for someone in a shoebox. He looked up at me serious. "They think you're in a shoebox. That's their mistake." I rewrote my will, shifted my medical directives, assigned a different power of attorney a young woman named Carla, whose mother I used to volunteer with at the senior center. Carla had visited me every Christmas, brought soup when I had the flu. She once fixed my phone when the settings locked. Quiet kindness. No obligation. When I signed her name into my affairs, I felt no regret. Rachel had mocked my age, my clothes, my nothing. She didn't know I was leaving everything I had. To someone she didn't even remember meeting. Let them laugh. The final move was a quiet purchase. A small office suite 3 miles from their house. I didn't need it, didn't even intend to use it, but I rented it out to a local therapist. One who specialized in couples counseling. That part was for later. By the time fall came, their lives were unraveling faster than they could hide. David came to visit again. He looked tired older. His hands fidgeted with his keys as he sat across from me. "Rachel's been different," he said, not meeting my eyes. "She's stressed all the time." "And the house?" He didn't finish, just sighed. I poured him tea. Quiet, steady. Let him sit with it. "She said some harsh things," he muttered. "That day, in your place?" "I didn't agree with her." "You didn't disagree either," I said. Calm, no edge. He looked at me ashamed. I didn't know what to say. I nodded. "That's the difference between being a son and being a man." He flinched. And I felt it. Not pride, not pleasure, just justice. I didn't tell him about the properties, or the trust, or the house behind theirs. Not yet. Instead, I said, "You two should come by for dinner sometime. I've made some changes." He blinked. "You renovated?" I smiled. Something like that. He promised to talk to Rachel. I knew she wouldn't want to come. But I knew she would. Eventually. People like her can't resist looking down on others. They just never think to look around. It started with the garden. Rachel always prided herself on her backyard, that carefully curated magazine spread sort of perfection. White trellises, artificial turf so smooth, it looked airbrushed lavender plants spaced in precise symmetry. And then one day, a truck backed up behind the property, the one she used to call an eyesore, and unloaded fresh soil, tall potted roses, and a team of quiet, fast-moving workers. By sundown, a brand new garden bloomed behind her fence. Wild, full, lush. Real. I sat on the porch of that house, just barely in her line of sight, watering the climbing vines that curled toward the trellis we'd added. I wore my straw hat and my old gloves, just like I used to when I tended Jack's garden back in the day. Rachel spotted me that evening. She did a double take. I watched her through the branches as her mouth opened slightly, then closed. She didn't know who owned the house yet. Not officially, but her instincts were good. The next morning, Simone called. "You'll never guess what Rachel said at brunch," she said, half whispering, like it was too good to say out loud. What I asked, smiling softly as I stirred my oatmeal. She said, "Someone finally bought the junkyard behind us. Now we've got weirdos planting roses." I chuckled. "Weirdos, huh?" Simone laughed too. I said, "Well, at least someone's taking care of it now." She didn't like that. The cracks had begun. A few days later, I got a notice from the HOA, not for my little rental, but for the house behind Rachel's. A complaint had been filed. Too many visible gardening structures. Petty, laughable. I knew exactly who had written it. I replied formally. The name on the deed wasn't mine, but the trust name Silverroot Holdings carried weight. I responded with city permits codes and compliance letters. There wasn't a single rule we hadn't followed. I waited. Then came the realtor. One afternoon, I spotted Rachel standing on her porch talking to a woman in heels with a clipboard. They walked the perimeter, the woman nodding, taking notes. At first, I thought they were trying to sell. But then I saw Rachel's hands waving frustrated and the woman shaking her head. The next day, I called my contact at the local planning office. An old friend from church. "The Stevens property," he said, chewing into the phone. "They've got a comp issue. That house behind them bumped their valuation out of line. They were trying to refinance. Didn't go well." I thanked him and hung up. The pieces were falling. Rachel had built her life on image, credit cards, appearances, and all of it was stacked like a Jenga tower. On loans and assumptions. When the market hiccuped, when David's commissions dropped, and her boutique failed, they were left exposed. And I'd been preparing for this exact moment. That week, David called again. "Can I stop by?" he asked. Of course, I said. He came by with a Tupperware of soup. I knew it was Rachel's idea. I accepted it anyway. He sat down, looked around the room like he was seeing it for the first time. "You've made this place cozy," he said. "I've always liked cozy," I replied. He hesitated. "Things have been rough lately. We're trying to cut back." I nodded, let him speak. "We might rent out a room, maybe downsize if the bank pushes it." I sipped my tea. "You'd sell the house?" He didn't answer right away. "I don't know. Rachel's not happy. She says it's too much stress. We've been arguing more. She even mentioned—" He trailed off. I leaned forward. "Mentioned what she brought up assisted living again. For you. Said maybe you'd be better off with help." The heat in my chest didn't rise anymore. It just settled like coals smoldering. "She thinks I need help. She says it'd be easier. You wouldn't have to worry about rent or bills." I looked him straight in the eye. "I don't worry about bills, David." He frowned. What do you mean, I mean? Rachel doesn't know what she's talking about. He looked confused, almost nervous. You've got savings? I've got more than savings? He blinked. Like, investments? I stood and walked to the drawer, pulled out the manila folder with Silver Root Holdings printed across the top. I handed it to him. He opened it, looked at the documents, the titles, the property records. This is yours, I nodded. Always has been. He looked stunned. You own the house behind ours and 2 others, and a small office, and a mineral lease that pays quarterly. He looked up, face pale. Why didn't you say anything? I sat down again, because no one asked. His hands trembled slightly. Rachel doesn't know. No, she doesn't. But she will. He looked down again. You could have helped us. I said nothing, because that was the moment I realized he still didn't understand. He saw me as an emergency fund, a backup plan, a resource. Not a mother, not a woman, just a safety net. I stood. David, I love you. I always have. But I'm not a bank, and I'm not a burden. He opened his mouth, closed it, then stood too. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I nodded. I know. As he left, I watched him from the window. He walked slower than usual, shoulders slightly hunched. The cracks weren't just in their finances anymore. They were in him. Rachel showed up 3 days later. No warning, no text, just the sound of her Lexus pulling into the gravel behind my rental. I was on the porch clipping dead leaves from the geraniums when I heard the door slam. Her heels clicked down the walkway like accusations. When she came into view, she was wearing sunglasses too big for her face and carrying one of those overpriced purses she always bragged about. The kind that cost more than what I used to earn in a month. Judy, she said, voice tight, we need to talk. I stood slowly, not smiling. Do we? She pulled off her sunglasses. Her eyes were bloodshot. Not from tears, no, Rachel didn't cry, but from exhaustion, panic, desperation. She looked thinner, hollow. She didn't bother with pleasantries. David told me? I raised an eyebrow. Told you what? Don't play dumb, she snapped. You own that house, the one behind us, and other things. He said you've been hiding money, properties, investments. I walked past her toward the door. Come inside. She followed, arms crossed, nostrils flared. I poured tea calmly, deliberately. I didn't offer her any. She sat stiffly across from me like the chair was made of nails. I don't understand, she said. Why would you keep that from us? We thought you were struggling. You thought, I said softly, because you never asked. Her lips curled. So this is about punishing us, making us feel small? I stared at her. Do you feel small, Rachel? She didn't answer. I never hid anything out of spite, I said. I lived simply, quietly. That's always been enough for me. I didn't want to show off. But I also didn't want to be used. Her mouth tightened. Used? We took care of you. I laughed then. Just once. A soft, dry sound. Took care of me? You mocked me in my own home. You told people I was a burden. You laughed at my curtains, my shoes, my life. She flushed color rising in her neck. People joke, Judy. You're being dramatic. No, I said. You're being exposed. She leaned forward, voice low and sharp. David's lost half his clients. We're 3 months behind on the mortgage. We have 2 credit cards maxed out. And your name? Your trust. Just cost us our refinancing. I know, I said calmly. I heard. She blinked. You heard my property manager sits on the HOA board? I hear more than you think. She stared at me, searching my face. For softness, for guilt, for weakness. But I gave her none. You don't understand, she whispered. We're drowning. And you thought I was the raft. Her jaw trembled just slightly. You could help us. You have enough. You could. I did help you. I interrupted louder now. I gave you everything I had. My savings, my home, my son. And you repaid me with contempt. She sat back like I'd slapped her. I never asked you for gratitude, I said. But I did hope for respect. I was under pressure, she said, her voice cracking. I was scared. I didn't mean those things. You meant them, I said flatly. You just didn't think I heard them. She looked down, her hands clenched in her lap, and for the first time, she didn't have a comeback. I stood and opened the drawer again, pulled out a thick envelope, handed it to her. She looked at it like it might explode. What is this options, I said. Inside was a breakdown, 3 pages. One showing their current mortgage position, one showing my available properties, and the last a formal offer. I would buy their home. In full, under market value, yes, but fair. I'd even allow them to rent it for a time, under a strict lease. You'd buy us out, she whispered. I'd give you an exit, I said. Not because you deserve it, but because David does. She blinked fast. So you are helping. No, I said. I'm closing the door, and I'm letting you walk through it while it's still open. She stared at the papers. Her pride wouldn't let her reach for them, but her desperation kept her from leaving. She looked up at me, and for once there was no sarcasm, no condescension, just shame. I was wrong, she said quietly. Yes, I replied. You were. She swallowed. I didn't think you had it in you. I leaned forward, eyes locked on hers. That's your problem, Rachel. You never thought I had anything. Silence. Then slowly, she rose. She left without another word, and when the door shut behind her, I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I just poured myself another cup of tea. Because justice doesn't always come loud. Sometimes it walks on quiet heels. I didn't hear from Rachel or David for 2 full weeks after that day. No calls, no messages, no surprise visits. I didn't expect them to accept my offer immediately, not with pride still clinging to Rachel like a second skin. But I knew they would eventually. The numbers didn't lie. They were running out of time, and I had all the leverage. I used those quiet days to settle the rest of my affairs. I sat at the little fold-out desk in my bedroom, sorting through folders and envelopes labels in neat rows. I had always kept my life organized. Even when Jack was alive, I was the one who tracked the bills, planned the meals, balanced the checkbook. After he passed, it became my way of holding on to sanity, structure, control. I opened the file marked Will, Lorraine, then pulled out my own. The contrast made me pause. Lorraine's had been handwritten on yellow legal paper, simple and full of love. Mine was typed, notarized, bound in a navy blue folder. Clean, sharp, but something about it didn't feel finished. I took a long walk that evening down the trail behind the rental house. My legs were slower now, knees a little stiff, but I still made it halfway to the old bridge before the sun started to sink. I sat on a bench under the sycamore tree and watched the light filter through the branches. It hit me then so gently I almost missed it. I didn't want to leave anything behind for people who had treated me like a relic. I didn't want my legacy reduced to a check or a deed. So the next morning, I went to Carla's office. She was surprised to see me. I thought everything was finalized, she said, flipping through her notes. It was, I replied. But I'm changing the beneficiary. Her eyebrows lifted. To who I smiled. To someone who never asked for anything. I didn't name David. I didn't name Rachel. Instead, I named Carla. Her mouth fell open. Wait me. You've never treated me like a burden, I said. You've treated me like a person. That's enough. She shook her head. Judy, I can't accept that kind of yes, I said firmly. You can. And you will. I spent the rest of that day making copies, filing forms, sealing envelopes. Then I wrote a letter. To David. It wasn't angry. I didn't list every hurt or betrayal. I simply told him the truth. That I loved him. That I always would. But that love didn't mean I had to be blind. I wrote I gave you everything I had when you were small. You were my joy, my reason, my heartbeat. But now I need to give what I have left to something that feels honest. That brings me peace. I didn't send it. Not yet. I waited. It was a rainy Tuesday when the knock came. I was on the porch again, sweater around my shoulders, tea in hand. I knew it was them before I even stood up. David looked tired, not just physically, spiritually, like someone who had finally accepted what he never wanted to admit. Rachel didn't speak. She stood beside him, arms crossed, hair in a loose bun, face stripped of all makeup and pretense. We'll sell, David said. I nodded. You made the right choice. He pulled the folder from his coat, handed it to me. Signed documents, notarized, their names in ink side by side. We want to stay for a few months, he said, until we figure things out. You can lease it, I replied. 6 months. After that, we'll reassess. Rachel still didn't speak. Thank you, David said quietly. Don't thank me, I said. Just learn from it. They left without sitting down, and that night I lit a candle on the windowsill and stared out into the rain. The house that had once been a symbol of all I'd lost was now mine. Legally, completely. But strangely, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt resolved. I pulled out my old photo album, flipped past the pages of Jack and me, of baby David, of birthdays and graduations and quiet mornings. And I realized something I hadn't said out loud, not even to myself. I had forgiven David. Not because he asked, not because he deserved it, but because I needed to. Forgiveness isn't always about the other person. Sometimes it's about letting go of the version of yourself that waited too long, held too tight, broke too quietly. I still loved my son, but I was done waiting for him to remember who I was. Now, it was my turn to live. Simone called again not long after the sale was finalized. I was trimming rosemary from the garden box outside when I heard her voice through the line, low, giddy, the kind of tone people use when they're about to spill something they know they shouldn't. You won't believe what I heard at Tuesday Club, she said. Rachel told Angela they sold the house because of a bad investment. I smiled. Is that so? She said David lost too much money trying to flip some properties, and they had no choice. But guess what? Angela's sister works at the title office. She saw the paperwork. I said nothing. Just let Simone keep going. She said the buyer's trust matched the same one that owns the house behind them. Same name, same agent. So of course, Angela put it together. Judy, everyone knows now. I didn't answer for a long moment. The wind blew gently through the rosemary. The sun warmed my face. Judy. Yes, you okay with that? I clipped a sprig and said, let them talk. Because the truth had already done its job. People always want to know what happened after. After the papers are signed. After the apologies, sincere or forced, are spoken. After the powerful have fallen and the quiet have risen. Here's what happened. Rachel became the woman with the nervous smile. The one who kept showing up at charity events with a new story each time inheritance issues, market downturn, restructuring their life. But no one really bought it, not after word got around. A few of the women Rachel used to mock. They started leaving her off guest lists. I saw one of them, a woman named Karen, with the loud laugh and the even louder jewelry, cross the street to avoid Rachel at the farmer's market. She used to beg for Rachel's recipes. Now she pretended not to see her. Funny how fast it all crumbles. David stopped by once a week now. Just him, always alone. He brought me odds and ends of pie from the co-op, an old photo frame he found at a yard sale, once even a pair of those plush slippers I used to wear when he was little. He never said he was sorry again. Not directly. But sometimes the way he looked at me, it was all there. Regret, shame, and something else, something more precious. Awareness. He'd stay for coffee, ask how my garden was doing, tell me how work was slow but steady, that he'd started designing smaller homes, now more sustainable ones. One day, he lingered a little longer and said, "You know, when Rachel found out you were the one behind all of it, she didn't speak for a full hour." I raised my eyebrows. "Miracles do happen." He laughed. "She still doesn't believe it, that you were capable of all this." "She thought I was weak," I said. "No," he replied. "She thought you were invisible." That stayed with me. Because being invisible is worse than being hated. It means people look right through you, assume you don't matter. Rachel hadn't just mocked my clothes or my home. She'd erased me from my own family, and she did it with a smile dressed in pearls holding champagne. But now, she lived in a house she didn't own, paying rent to the woman she once called pathetic. The irony didn't bring me joy, not exactly, but it did bring balance. I started making changes, quiet ones. I donated part of the rental income to the literacy program at the community center. I sponsored 2 kids from the local school to attend summer art camp. I fixed up the porch swing behind the house Rachel and David now leased. Some mornings I'd see her sitting on it alone, phone in hand, face blank. I never waved. She never looked my way. One afternoon, Carla stopped by to check on some paperwork. She sat at my table flipping through forms, sipping the sweet tea I made with fresh mint. "You know," she said, "you don't have to live here anymore. With the equity you've got, you could buy something nicer, bigger." I smiled. "I don't want bigger. I want peace." She nodded slowly. "And are you at peace?" I thought about it. About Jack. About the little house we built together. About David's tiny hand in mine on his first day of school. About the nights I cried and the mornings I woke up and kept going anyway. "Yes," I said finally. "I think I am." That night, I walked around my small garden barefoot, feeling the warm soil between my toes. I listened to the quiet. No one yelling, no one judging. Just the wind and the leaves and the gentle creak of the porch. Rachel never apologized again. Not directly, but the silence between us became her confession. And the way she looked away whenever we crossed paths, that was her admission. Sometimes you don't need an apology to close the door. Sometimes just knowing the truth is enough. Rachel came over again. This time, she brought a tray of lemon bars, still warm, wrapped in a towel, like that made it feel homemade. I opened the door, stared at her, then stepped aside without saying a word. She set them gently on the table, adjusting the towel, like it mattered. "I thought you liked lemon," she said softly. I did. I always had. She knew that. I just looked at her. She sat across from me, smoothing out her skirt with both hands, eyes darting around the room like she was searching for something she'd lost. Or maybe trying to avoid what was right in front of her. "I wanted to talk," she said finally. "I figured." She sighed. "You've been quiet. You've been loud enough for both of us." That stung her. I saw it in her shoulders, the way they dipped just slightly. "I know I said things, cruel things," she said, "but I didn't think they mattered to you." I raised an eyebrow. "Why? Because I never raised my voice? Because I smiled and poured tea while you laughed at me behind your wine glass?" She flinched. "That wasn't fair." "No," I said. "It wasn't." She looked down. I got caught up, trying to keep up, trying to build something that looked like success, even if it wasn't. I thought, if I could keep everything looking perfect, it would be perfect. And that gave you permission to treat people like furniture? She didn't answer. I leaned back. Say what you came to say, Rachel. She looked up, and for the first time I saw something behind the eyes, not fear, not pride, but something closer to surrender. You don't have to forgive me, she said. I don't expect that, but I needed you to know I regret it. Not just because of where we ended up, but because I see it now. All of it. What you gave. What I took. The silence sat thick between us. Heavy. Real. She stood slowly, her hands trembling. Thank you for letting us stay. I know you didn't have to. No, I said. I didn't. She turned toward the door, paused, then looked back. Are you going to keep the house? Yes. As a rental for now. She nodded slowly, then left. The door shut gently behind her. I walked to the tray of lemon bars, unwrapped the towel, and stood there for a long moment. Then I picked one up, took a bite. Too sweet. That weekend, David came by again. He was quiet too, but softer now. Not walking on eggshells, more like walking through fog, not quite sure what he'd find on the other side. Mom, he said, can I ask you something? Of course. Why didn't you tell me about everything? The houses, the money, the land. I stirred the tea slowly, because I didn't want our relationship to depend on it. And when it did anyway, I needed to know who you really were without it. He looked at his hands. Did I fail? I thought about it. Long and hard. Then I said, you got lost. But you came back. He didn't speak again for a while. Just sat with me drinking quietly, eyes glassy. Before he left, I gave him the letter I'd written weeks ago. The one I never sent. Read it when you're ready, I told him. He tucked it into his jacket, kissed my cheek. Thanks, Mom. That night, I slept deeper than I had in years. Because I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for apologies. Not for recognition. Not for change. I had already changed. And whether they saw it or not, I was finally living on my own terms. The next morning, I stood in the backyard of the house Rachel used to call hers. I looked at the deck she'd bragged about, now faded, worn. I walked through the kitchen where she once told a friend I was a sad little woman with nothing. Now every room had my fingerprints on it. The plumbing, the repairs, the title. It was all mine, not out of spite, but because I had earned it. And they had never seen me coming. I watched her break from my window. It was slow, deliberate, not the dramatic kind where someone throws plates or shouts into the night. Rachel didn't know how to break loudly. She unraveled in silence, in posture, in smaller shoes, and pulled back hair, in glances that no longer challenged but pleaded. The eviction notice came on a Monday. Not for unpaid rent that never happened under my watch. But their lease had expired, and I had no intention of renewing it. I'd made that decision the day she walked into my home with lemon bars and guilt. There are apologies, and then there are admissions made only to avoid consequences. Hers were the latter. The notice was formal, signed by the property manager. I didn't deliver it myself. That wasn't my role anymore. I had given them time, given them space. Now, I was giving them distance. David called that night. We got the notice, he said. Yes, I replied. We've been looking for another place. But it's hard. I stayed quiet. Let him speak. Rachel's with her sister for a few days. She took it badly. She'll recover, I said. He sighed into the line. Are you doing this to punish us? I shook my head, though he couldn't see it. No, David. I'm doing this to protect myself and to make space for the life I never got to live. He was quiet for a long time. Then he whispered, I understand. I don't know if you do, I said, but maybe someday you will. 2 weeks later, they were gone. I walked through the house after the cleaners finished. Empty rooms always have an echo, but this one felt different. This wasn't a hollow echo. It was a clearing, a breath. The upstairs closet still had one of Rachel's old scarves hanging on the back of the door. I touched it once, then tossed it in the donation pile. On the kitchen counter, I left a single envelope. Not for them, for the new tenants. A young couple with a baby on the way. I'd interviewed them myself, heard their story. They reminded me of who Jack and I once were. The envelope held a welcome letter and a note, take care of this home. It once held the weight of things unspoken. That afternoon, I sat on my own porch, the sun dipping behind the maple tree I'd planted just last spring. Its roots had taken hold fast, strong, resilient. Simone came by with sweet tea and a knowing smile. She sat beside me, passed me a cup. You look different, she said. How so, lighter? I nodded. I feel it. She leaned back. So what's next? You going to buy the whole block? I laughed. No, just going to enjoy the view. The view had changed. Not just the houses, not just the landscape. Me. I was no longer the woman waiting at the edges of someone else's life. I had written my own chapter, quietly, thoroughly. Rachel never came back, not even to pick up the mail. She sent a friend once who barely looked at me as she handed over a small bundle of forwarded letters. David still called, less frequently now. But when he did, there was a softness in his voice. A weight lifted. He was working again. Designing community housing, he said. Smaller footprints, smarter layouts. He told me once you inspired that. I didn't ask how. I didn't need to. Sometimes the lessons we leave behind don't need to be carved in stone. They're left in silence, in boundaries, in the firm setting of a line. And I had drawn mine. One evening, I received a letter in the mail. No return address, no note, just a card. Inside a simple sentence. You were right to stop waiting. I knew it was from Rachel. She finally saw it. The line. I didn't reply. Some things are better left where they fall. The following Sunday, I walked to the small park nearby, sat under the willow tree where Jack and I used to bring David as a boy. Children laughed in the distance, dogs barked, and the world moved on. But I was still. Present. Free. For the first time in decades, I wasn't defined by my past, or by the people who mistook my kindness for weakness. I wasn't forgotten. I was unseen on purpose. And now, they couldn't look away. David visited one last time before the year turned. He showed up in the early afternoon, coat unbuttoned, eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. No agenda. No favor to ask. Just him standing at my gate, holding a small paper bag with bakery grease seeping into the corners. I brought almond croissants, he said, almost sheepish. I let him in. We didn't say much for the first few minutes. The silence was comfortable this time, lived in. He watched me set the kettle moving around my kitchen like he used to in high school, hovering near, but never quite in the way. I made us tea, plated the pastries, and we sat at the table where so much had changed, without anyone ever noticing. I read your letter, he said after a while. I nodded. He pulled it from his jacket, the envelope soft around the edges, like he'd been carrying it for weeks. It hurt to read, I know, but I needed to read it. I folded my hands in my lap. I needed to write it. I was angry at first, he admitted, and then ashamed. David, I said gently. I wasn't asking for guilt. I was asking for clarity. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Not as his mother. Not as the woman Rachel used to mock. But as someone entirely separate. I think I've always known how much you gave, he said. But I didn't understand the cost. You weren't meant to? I replied. Not as a child, but as a man. Maybe now you do. He nodded, eyes glossy. He looked down at his tea, then out the window. The garden was quiet in its winter hush. Rachel and I are separating, he said suddenly. I blinked, but didn't flinch. She left 2 weeks ago. Took her things while I was at work. Left a note on the counter. What did it say? Just 3 words. I lost everything. I didn't ask if he wanted her back. I didn't ask if he was hurting. I just sat with him. That was enough. I've been going through our photos, he said after a while. The ones from when I was a kid. You and Dad. Our old house. I forgot how small it was. It was small, I said, but it was full. He smiled at that. I don't know how to fix everything, he whispered. I can't undo what I let happen. No, I said. But you can choose what kind of man you want to be now. He wiped at his eyes quickly like a boy embarrassed to be caught crying. I want to earn back your trust, he said. Not through words, through presence. I reached across the table and took his hand. Then start by showing up, not for me, for yourself. We sat there a while just holding hands across chipped porcelain cups and the quiet promise of something better. When he left, he paused at the door. You know for what it's worth. Rachel never knew you owned it. I tilted my head. The house, he said. Even after we moved out. Even after we were long gone. I don't think it ever really sank in. I smiled. That's because she never believed I could. He laughed, a real one this time. Yeah. Well, joke's on her. After he left, I walked into the garden. The sky was pinking at the edges, soft streaks of light across a quiet horizon. I thought about how many times I'd watered these plants, pulled weeds, nurtured things most people walked right past. I thought about how long I had let others define what I was worth. But not anymore. Now I defined it. And it wasn't just in deeds or titles or bank accounts. It was in the silence I chose. The decisions I made. The lines I held. That evening, I sat by the window in my warm little room. A far cry from the drafty shoebox Rachel had once scoffed at. I had remodeled it over the summer. New paint, new floors, a bay window overlooking the street where neighborhood kids rode their bikes and the wind played in the trees. It was still small, but now it was fully mine. Not just in ownership, in spirit. I picked up the envelope that held my revised will, read through the names once more. No corrections, no edits. Carla's name stood firm. David's name was there too. Not as an heir, but as the one who would receive my journals, my letters, my story. Because some things can't be passed down in trust funds or deeds. Some things have to be understood. He had earned that much. As for Rachel, she had taken herself out of the picture. She didn't need a final goodbye. She had written her ending the moment she laughed at the beginning of mine. And that more than any signature on a deed was closure. They never saw it coming. Not when I handed over the down payment that built their so-called dream. Not when I let myself fade into the background, laughed at, ignored, overlooked. Not even when they mocked my home, thinking it was rented temporary beneath them. They never once stopped to ask, what if she's not what we think she is? But now I sit in this same room they once ridiculed, and everything about it is mine. The walls freshly painted in a soft cream. The window expanded into a wide bay that looks out over my herb garden. The bookshelf no longer sagging, now built into the wall with custom woodwork. Every photo inside placed by hand. My hand. There's a piece here that doesn't ask for validation. A silence I've come to love. When I turn in the chair and look at my reflection in the tall mirror beside the doorway, I see someone calm, steady, someone who outlived the mockery and came out the other side with dignity intact. This home wasn't a rental. It never was. I bought it 34 years ago, before Jack died, before David turned 13. It was our safety net, our secret. When I sold the family home, I never sold this one. I moved back quietly and let the world believe what it wanted. Let Rachel laugh. Let her call it small. Let her say I'd never own anything. Because the truth was always sitting right under her nose. And now I sit by the window sipping tea, watching the morning light spill over the leaves. The house they used to call theirs, it's been rented out to a quiet young couple who stop by with fresh muffins on Sundays and leave handwritten notes in the mailbox when they go away for the weekend. Rachel is gone. I don't know where she ended up. I don't need to. David still visits. Less often now, but when he does, it's just to sit and talk. No fixing, no asking, no pretending. He told me last week I still think about the day you slid that envelope across the table. The look on Rachel's face. I finally saw her see you. I smiled. That was never my goal. I know, he said. But it felt good, didn't it? I didn't answer. Some truths don't need words. In the end, what I kept, my land, my homes, my story, mattered far less than how I kept it. Quiet, honest, measured. I didn't need to announce my power to claim it. And when the laughter stopped, when the facade cracked, when the world saw who I really was, it wasn't revenge that held me up. It was self-respect. There's a photo on the mantle now, Jack and me on the porch of this house, before it was remodeled. He's holding a wrench. I'm holding a mug. We look so young, so sure. That woman, she had no idea what was coming. But she was stronger than she knew, and I honor her now by living the way she dreamed, peacefully, quietly, on her own terms. Let them call it a twist, a surprise, a reveal. But I know what it really was. It was a woman finally standing where she always belonged, and owning everything they said she never would.